Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us today to talk about philanthropy's role in advancing racial equity. Before I even introduce myself, I want to share a version of an acknowledgement that was shared with some of us yesterday from Jennifer Lockwood Shabbat. We are on the unceded land of the Powhatan Confederacy, which includes a number of tribes, including the Pamunkey and the Kisakik. Additionally, we must acknowledge that Africans were enslaved on this very land, and that slavery is a part of the history of colonial Williamsburg, and that history must be shared every time the story is told. Our Indigenous and Black ancestors have been with us throughout this conference. And as a membership, as we envision a Virginia where all communities and residents are valued and thriving, we must envision the same in this room at this conference for our philanthropic community. My name is Rashawn Atkins-Roan, and I am joined the Weisberg Foundation as Executive Director about 6 months ago, and I have the pleasure of introducing one of today's session designers, Stephanie Glenn. But before I do that, I'll take 2 minutes of privilege to share a little bit about the Weisberg Foundation and our racial equity journey. The Weisberg Foundation named racial equity as its North Star over 5 years ago and explicitly acknowledged the structural racism as the root cause of so many of the issues philanthropy is actively trying to influence. While our commitment to racial equity and justice was evident in our mission and vision, up until recently, our value of racial equity and justice was not explicit. The asterisk is there because on March 5th of this year at its board meeting, the board unanimously voted to update our value to explicitly say racial equity and racial justice. We did that to make our commitment clear, particularly in an environment where other organizations are unable to name racial equity because of their local context or unwilling to name it because of their personal politics. We openly discussed whether naming racial equity would categorize us and ultimately decided that embracing racial equity and justice didn't mean we aren't committed to other types of equity, but on the contrary, affirm that people of color do not live one-issue lives. Embracing racial justice is an embrace of gender justice, disability justice, economic justice, really all the justices. I'm not having good clicker success. Thank you. So I'll just want to share briefly about how we operationalize our commitment to racial equity through every aspect of our work. Because getting to this place, still no good, and you can just click through. Because getting to this place of deep racial inequity and injustice has been generations in the making, and getting to racial equity and justice will require a multi-generational commitment. We provide multi-year general operating support primarily to Black and Brown-led organizations who are identified through a participatory approach. We can go to the next slide. The foundation has made decisions and continues to discuss ways to deepen our commitment across every area of the foundation. So from its inception, our bylaws provided that 50% of our board would be family members and 50% would be independent directors. We are embarking on an exploration of our wealth creation story, including who was harmed in the accumulation of our wealth and to whom the foundation owes repair. We're applying a racial equity lens to the stewardship of our endowment, And operationally, we're conducting HR equity reviews and engaging in stakeholder advocacy with our vendors and our partners around their racial equity journeys. I look forward to connecting with some of you individually to learn about your journey at your foundation. Now let me introduce my friend and colleague, Stephanie Glenn. Stephanie has a passion for philanthropy and how its impact can build bridges, fill gaps, and connect resources to inspire change in communities. Her experience is rooted as a foundation executive, early childhood education champion, curator in Black philanthropy, and diversity strategist. Stephanie is currently the Vice President of Diversity and Engagement at the Community Foundation for a Greater Richmond, where she leads the development and implementation of diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies across the organization. Stephanie leads a groundbreaking analysis of Black philanthropy in the region, Giving Black Greater Richmond. Stephanie.
Community Foundation, but this morning I am representing the Social Change Networking Group with VFN. I had the honor to co-design this workshop with my friend Mark Constantine from Richmond Memorial Health, so thank you, Mark. A few housekeeping I want to get out the way. So at the end of this session, there'll be a availability to complete the evaluation via QR code. What this does is not only you can give your feedback at that time, but it will also capture everyone that's in the room and the panelists that you'll hear from today, so you'll be able to connect. So please make sure you do that. We won't go into full bios today, but you can view them also via the QR code in the back of your conference programs. You will notice that you have Post-it notes on the table. If you have questions that you don't want to say publicly or you think about afterward, you can fill them out and put them on the walls. We will collect them at the end. Because any questions that are not answered today, you can return to a social justice networking group, and we can address those throughout the year. A little bit about the social networking group. It started in 2021. It was created to explore key issues across social, political, racial, and economic landscapes in the Commonwealth. We leaned into sharing. We wanted to build community, and we wanted to have conversation about applying the equity lens in emerging issues in philanthropy and for our grant partners. If you are interested in the social group networking, there is space for you. I had a co-chair, Lenny Dorswick, who was with the Weisberg Foundation. She has moved on, so there is space for someone who would like to join. Now for today's discussion. Why social justice and philanthropy? We all know that philanthropy originated out of a tax code, simply. But then it grew to generosity, equaling to decades of giving to causes that bridge gaps and survival services for families. But now, we heard the word last night around urgency for what the pandemic, the injustices, and what the data exposed. We now no longer can operate in the same vein. Philanthropy must lean into root causes of social, racial, economic, and environmental injustices. We need to dig deeper and to invest in the barriers of why the gaps are present in the first place. This type of gathering here today at VFN really needs to go from a lowercase I to a capital I intentionality. We must be the connectors between social justice organizing and philanthropy and use this space to transfer philanthropic sectors towards redistribution rather than just charity. For timing's sake, I won't go into the full guidelines that lead us at the Foundation with Social Change Philanthropy, but at the highest level of adopting the top two values within VFN, equity and humanity, as a sector, we must not only give general operating support to Black-led, Native-led, immigrant-led organizations and solutions that work best for their communities, but give them power of position as they are doing the work in their organizations. But inside our foundations, this work must be Black-led, Native-led, and immigrant-led in positions of voice, power, and decision-making for us to see a transformation in our sector. You will see that played out this morning during our time together. The best way to move this work is to be in conversation with one another. Really, no matter where your organization is on the social justice spectrum, you can be just starting out or thinking about what to do, or you can really be deep in the work. I know some foundations are really rooted in it for years. We will be talking to one another, engaging in conversation. You will witness our thoughts and our feelings in this work. Christopher Chavis, I will not read his bio, but I admire Christopher's work and what he's been able to accomplish. But more importantly than that, he has my heart because he leads with love, speaks with power, fearlessly advocating for LGBTQ plus, immigrant, and racial justice movements. I'll turn it over to Christopher. It's a lot.
Shima panolti kwalitunali. Notoka Christopher Cuevas, Nishpeka, Nitismati. Good morning. Hello, my name is Christopher Cuevas. I just greeted you in my indigenous language. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here with you all, and it's my honor to be a witness to the brilliance that is seated to my right. Today, we will be engaging in a really fruitful conversation that is going to hopefully propel those of us in the room who are at the beginning of our journey toward racial equity and accelerate those of us who are deep in our commitment and wanting to level up and truly invest in justice work broadly. And before we jump into these really great conversations, I want to let our guests, our audience, know that we invite you to share your questions using the digital tool Slido, really so that we can hear directly from you as part of this discussion that we'll have amongst each other. It's a very easy tool to use. You can either take out your smartphone or tablet and open the web browser and visit slido.com and type in the event code 215411. Alternatively, you can activate the camera on your device and scan the QR code that's found on the screen. Be sure to select the room labeled Racial Equity to ensure that we are able to view any questions that you submit. These questions are anonymous, so feel free to be as honest and as vulnerable as you would like so that we can ensure that we are tailoring this conversation to meet your needs and to meet you where you are at. Now, I have the privilege of introducing a new friend. Please join me in welcoming Kendra Jones, who is the Special Projects Officer at the Richmond Memorial Health Foundation, who will guide us through a thought-provoking presentation that invites foundations and partners alike to begin questioning our role in the weaving of practices of racial equity into our service for community. She will provide us with practical steps to embark on this journey of personal growth and cultural transformation. As we bear witness to Kendra's brilliance, I invite you to please submit your questions using Slido. Now, thank you, Kendra. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Christopher. So good morning, BFN.
Good morning.
Oh, I love that. Thank you. So in all transparency, I have a heavy lift this morning. I'm going to put on my glasses because I can barely see now. I hit 40 and the eyesight went, Just to kind of set the stage and give you a little background information about this heavy lift that I'm about to present to you. I was a 2019-20 member of Philanthropy Southeast Hall Fellows class. And a part of our capstone project, my group and I created this interactive equity roadmap toolkit for foundations to use to help them along their equity journeys. And so it's quite detailed. It shares information with you all that we gathered from surveys that we put out to the membership of Philanthropy Southeast. And just let me test the room. Are there any previous or current Hall Fellows in the audience? No? All right, well, I'll represent. I know I would like to acknowledge Robert Dorch, who is chair of the board for Philanthropy Southeast. So thank you for all that you're doing and you all continue to do, especially with the equity framework that Philanthropy Southeast put out. All right, let's get started. I'm going to test the clicker here. No, I'm going to use my computer. All right, we know that the last couple of years have been layered in major issues of equity due to the pandemic and racial unrest, and that most of us in philanthropy really scrambled to respond. Well, when we did respond, we responded in a huge way, putting more dollars out in the community, I think, than we had in a long time. So really impressed with the response. But 2020 served as a huge wake-up call that equity work needs to become a priority for all of us. So because of this, my Philanthropy Southeast Hall Fellows group felt that equity and philanthropy was way too big of a topic not to highlight. We realized that there are so many valuable resources out there to help foundations along this journey. But that's only if you know the right place to look, you have time to do that search. And sometimes when you're just beginning, it can feel so overwhelming. So our team decided to create this toolkit where you could find this information right at your fingertips. It's different than white papers, lit reviews, because you answer a few questions and resources are provided for you. Before I get into talking about the creation of the tool more, I would love to share with you the remarkable ladies who are a force of all women who created this team, who created the toolkit. So we had Carrie Campbell and Amy Green, who were with SunTrust, now Truist Bank, Ann Davis with the Christie Houston Foundation, Elizabeth Warren with the Community Foundation of Greater Memphis, and Susan Aspinwall with the Sarah Giles Moore Foundation. And are you all able to see the screen right? Are you good? Okay. I will let you know that during this presentation, because it's so detailed and it takes quite an amount of time to present it, that I'm going to ask questions, and I hope that you all are an engaged audience. Please don't let me stand up here and just talk to myself. All right, so just a little background for you all. Before we created the tool, we wanted to take a sampling of where Philanthropy Southeast membership stood on a few data points as it related to DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. This data recaps the responses we received from 35 different funders, and it helped influence the content of our interactive tool. So, and I'm trying to find my cursor on here and it's not working. Out of the 35 survey respondents, a wide variety of foundation types were represented, with most of the respondents being from family or health legacy foundations. I work with the health legacy foundations. Foundations of all asset sizes were represented, with the majority representing 100 million to 250 million. And then there were foundations represented that served urban, rural, and suburban communities, with the majority of them serving all three. So we included questions like, is it? Help, John. And while he's getting that back together, I'll let you know that the survey included questions like, what demographics did foundations' decision makers represent? What grant-making processes were in place? And if foundations knew the demographics of the board, staff, and people being served by their grantees? And if so, does this data inform their grant-making? Don't you all love technology?
Give me a second.
Thank you. I appreciate you. Oh, is that? I was using the wrong clicker. Ah. All right. So from those responses, one of the things that we learned that the foundations that responded to our survey told us that on average, their boards look heavily like da 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 this. So based on demographics of race, gender, and age, with an average board size of 12 members for most funders, respondents said that their boards identify as majority white, majority male, and between the ages of 41 and 70. So, question, and please be engaging. Let's get a visual on this. We'll do it this way. Does this surprise you all? If it does, please raise your hand. That's what I thought. Respondents also told us that their staff members mostly look like this. With an average staff size of 7 people, respondents said that different from board representation, the majority of their foundation's staff skew younger and way more female. But similar to board representation, their staff is still overwhelmingly white. So another question for you, and this time you can just think about it, or you can jot down notes on your sticky notes, or you can whisper to your neighbor. If this is an average picture of our foundation boards and staff, in what ways do you think it limits philanthropy? All right, here are a few more learnings from our survey. Regarding the grant-making processes of our respondents, most told us that they have at least one application process that is open or publicly accessible. And 80% of our respondents said that general operating, unrestricted support is at least one funding approach for their foundation. So both of these are encouraging stats to hear, but it's just the beginning of the work that we need to do around equity. So when asked if their foundation collects demographic data from applicants around nonprofit board, staff, and the communities they serve to inform their grant-making decisions, what we found most interesting is that foundations that do collect data have a decent idea of the demographics of those being served, but not necessarily whether the board or staff of their grantees reflect the communities they serve. Also, 80% said, let me repeat that, 80% said that they are not using that demographic data at all or only sometimes to inform their grant making. Does that surprise you all? You can say yes or no. Yeah. We have a lot of work to do. All right. So our survey also asked about foundation activities that were done in 2020 related to DEI. And I'm not going to read these to you, but as you can see, Philanthropy Southeast members were extremely busy. All right, for the sake of time, I'm going to summarize some survey takeaways for you. A quick glance of where respondents were on their DEI journey, results show that regardless of foundation type, asset size, or community served, 2020 saw interest in DEI become a priority, right? That's not news or shocking. On average, we were not where we need to be, but foundations were starting to put in work, and that's encouraging. We learned that foundations have room for improvement from board and staff diversity, all the way up to how they're using demographic data to inform their grant making. Our survey results illustrated that we are not alone in trying to maneuver our equity journeys, and that taking part in this journey will help ensure that we are equitably addressing the needs of those most impacted by systemic racism. I'm just going to call it out. Our interactive tool, which is different from white papers and lit reviews, like I mentioned, pulls together a wide variety of available resources to help us all in making real, impactful change. So here it is. Our interactive equity roadmap. Well, it's an example of it anyway. So on any journey, we knew that our starting point was extremely important. So we did some research and was so impressed with Annie E. Casey Foundation's Race Equity and Inclusion Action Guide that we chose to use it to serve as the framework to use our friendly, interactive navigation tool. Their framework offered straightforward, logical steps to build an equity lens into our dashboard of daily practices. You'll hear me use a lot of card lingo because it's a roadmap. So the steps include establish, engage, gather, conduct, identify, operations, grants, and evaluate. And so let's take a demo journey. So as you travel on the equity roadmap, at each stop, you're asked if your foundation has either yes, addressed the step, or is looking for guidance to help you get started, or your foundation is addressing the step, but it's definitely still a work in progress. So for the very first step with establish, hold on, let me see if I can get my gear. We ask if you have established a basic understanding of equity and inclusion principles, including, and Edward, we talked about this yesterday, developing shared language to define terms like equity, to be sure that everyone is using these terms in the same way. And when we looked at Annie E. Casey's action guide, they described this as name it, frame it, and explain it. So if you have established language, then you would choose looking for guidance, and you would just click on that icon, a little car icon right there, and it will take you here, where you can choose from 4 different resources to see which one fits your foundation the best. Or you could click on all of them, it's your choice. It features modules, 2 articles, and 1 manual. So for this demo journey, let's choose how to begin equity work in your organization with little or no money. Resources are scarce, right? All right, here we go. Here, when you click on it, it takes you to the resource. It takes you to it in a new window so you can go back to the equity roadmap where you were. This particular resource from the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits offers a deep dive in how to have those difficult conversations around race and racism. There are also links to videos, a series of 4 webinar recordings, and other specific tools for group activities and discussions within the resource that you can examine and use. So ultimately, it's so rich that it's a resource with resources in that resource, so it's very useful. The second step is engage. This step in your journey includes engaging a mix of stakeholders to ensure their voices are a part of the conversation. So for this one, let's choose work in progress. And here you will see it will take you here with these resources. And for this example, let's choose participatory grant making by the Ford Foundation. And you mentioned your participatory approach earlier too, Rashawn. So this guide here promotes participatory grant making as a means for impacted populations to have more voice in decision-making processes, decisions that affect how they live. What's great about it is that it also includes a starter framework for those who are ready to begin the process of listening to those voices and, more importantly, sharing power. All right, for the next step is gather. And I know I may be going fast, but this information will be provided to you all. Demographic data collected on grantees and the communities they serve should be used to allocate grant-making dollars and resources to affect change where it is needed most. And if you're looking for guidance on how to do that, click on the icon. And here you can select the resource. Let's choose how we collect data determines whose voice is heard. It's a good one. So this guide by the Schusterman Family Foundation includes a diverse set of resources, again, resources within resources, on best practices and sample questions for collecting demographic data to help make informed decisions that reflect the true diversity of the communities we serve. All right, for our fourth step, we arrive at conduct. This step involves conducting a systems analysis by looking at problems holistically. This includes accounting for the region's racial makeup and history to analyze both the root causes of inequities and what you can do to change these patterns. So let's say you're trying to do this work but really need help. So again, let's choose looking for guidance. And here you will see the following resources that include a wealth of information to help you prioritize decisions and understand the root causes of inequities. Let's mix it up. Let's choose a video for this one. So here, this resource is a video series by the American Medical Association that discusses the need to prioritize and understand the root causes of inequities by addressing the social determinants of health, something near and dear to our hearts. That's where we live, where we work, and where we play. So now we land at identify. At this step, you need to identify strategies and solutions on how to invest your grant-making dollars to begin to impact real change on a systemic level. You want to move those levers. And depending on where you are on your journey, we identify numerous resources to assist you. But for a change of pace, let's say that you're actually already doing this, which is fantastic, right? So what else can you do then? All right, so click on yes. And here, what you see is that you've identified strategies and have targeted your resources to address the root causes of inequities in the communities you serve. But are you using this as an opportunity to share your learnings with others? My Hall Fellows group found that this step was one of the most important steps. So we provided a link to the W.K. Kellogg Foundation that shares their journey to give you an example of how you can share your journey with others too, so that we all can benefit from it. And when you examine this resource, you will see that Kellogg does a beautiful job of sharing what they have learned along their journey, and that you can do the same for others. All right, let's take a look at the next step in our equity tool, which is operations. This step is an opportunity to look internally and examine how policies and procedures in your foundation's operations may be serving as a roadblock for your own DEI efforts. Let's think back to those survey results, right, from our respondents around board and staff representation. What might we as foundations change in our hiring and recruiting practices to be more welcoming of candidates of color so that we can build a more diverse staff and board? For this step, let's say your foundation has conducted an equity impact assessment for its operational policies, but is unsure of what to do with the findings. So in the tool, you should click on work in progress. I feel like I'm always clicking on work in progress because me, myself, I'm a work in progress. So here you will see a couple of resources on how to keep advancing this work. And a great one to select is the Talent Justice Toolkit by Fund the People. This toolkit covers important topics like eliminating bias in recruitment, hiring, and performance evaluations, strategies for equitable compensation, and creating pathways for leadership development, all in an effort to help foundations take actionable steps to promote equity internally. All right, next you want to examine how your grant-making practices fit within your proposed strategies to address systemic change, and if your grant-making practices tie to your equity framework. So, have you conducted a race equity impact grant-making assessment? If yes, then we recommend this guide, Grant Making with a Racial Justice Lens. This resource aims to take your strategies one step further. It identifies best practices for foundations to drive philanthropy beyond racial equity towards racial justice. I'm just going to take a deep breath, you all. We made it to the last step. We did it. However, it's important to remember that this work will be a journey where you will always have to reevaluate the effectiveness of your grant making with your policies and your practices. And our CEO knows that I like to call out the 3 Ps: people, practices, and policies. And how are you doing on those 3 Ps? It's called routine.
Thank you so much for that wonderful, wonderful presentation, Kendra. For folks to be aware, this the toolkit that she walked us through is going to be available on the agenda. So all you need to do is turn to the last page of your little pamphlet with all the sessions, and in there you'll be able to access this wonderful tool. So please join me in welcoming Edward Jones, the Vice President of Programs and Philanthropic Services at Abafee, and a trustee of the Weisberg Foundation, who in our conversation will share his perspectives as a leader in the field working to advance racial equity and philanthropy broadly, and offer guidance to trustees and board members of foundations who seek to begin or accelerate this body of work within their respective institutions. Again, as Edward shares his wisdom, I invite you to submit your questions using Slido. All right, so let's give a hand to Edward. So Edward, you have the pleasure of serving as a trustee for the Weisberg Foundation, which, as Rashawn noted earlier, has expressly committed itself to building access, opportunity, and power for communities that have been challenged by social, political, and economic inequalities, all as a result of systemic racism. So knowing how deeply pervasive these issues are, I'm wondering, how does the Foundation's leadership begin to unpack the magnitude of these issues?
Thank you. Thank you all for being in this conversation and actually appreciating Weisberg for inviting me to be a part of its service. I think the unpacking piece is it's complicated because sometimes folks feel that they are farther along than they should be. Some folks are afraid to even start the journey. They don't even want the keys, let alone the test drive, right? So coming into an organization that has made a commitment and understood that it is on a journey, that it has not figured everything out, made me really excited about being part of the organization. I did get a chance to kind of observe and meet some folks along the way. I was persuaded by the previous CEO, was also a neighbor of mine around coming to join, so there was a little bit of a nudge, but you can always say no. I was more enthused about what I saw, the promise of the organization, and walking the talk. I mean, as in my role at Abafee, part of my role includes a leverage the trust network that we have around Black Foundation trustees, right? And in that space, we always are encouraging folks to find your place, get a seat on a board, do something. So how could I say no to an opportunity, and then also say no to an opportunity that was doing work that I felt it was already part of my ministry? I tend to think work and an opportunity to be in the space and a community that where I live and work and appreciate and want to see better. So starting becomes part of the commitment, being willing to understand that, being willing to recognize that you haven't figured it all out, and it's not your job individually to figure it all out, to figure out how to work in community with the foundation, working community with the community. All those things become part of the road and the journey ahead.
And with that, one, I want to say I'm happy to be a part of that ministry too.
Amen. Amen.
But you and I had a conversation on Monday, and you said to me something that really just stuck to my heart. And it was that philanthropy is the elephant in the room of movement. And you cautioned that as well-intentioned as we want to be as philanthropists, as people working in this field to advance equity and empower community, we can often create solutions, air quotes, that are deeply problematic.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, can you address that a little bit more?
Well, it's hard to say that I've been in philanthropy for now 20 years. I went to the University of Council and Foundations, which is not a real university, but that's where I started working in this sector in 2001, which I thought was going to be a short-lived exercise, just while I was working to get another position, and it stuck with me. I realized that it was more than just a job, but it was something that I felt was a part of what I wanted to do, how I wanted to also be part of and show up in the world. So through that journey and this continued journey, I see and have learned that there's good, there's bad, and there is all those things. Yeah, the ugly, evil, all those things for sure. And but through that, I mean, I think that shows up in fill in the blank sector, right? We find joy, we find pain along the way. But what I clung to then and what I continue to cling to is the idea of the good side of this work. And the notion that that we're going to get things figured out, in this, fiscal year is it's a fool's exercise to get so caught up on the idea that it has to happen immediately. Not to say that gives room for a slow elephant-like movement, maybe a sloth, maybe even a snail. That's the part that becomes ugly to me, because I think even with this, what cousin Kendra just did, that presentation, all those tools that are out there on this journey that exist, and there are plenty more, and folks still like, how do I get started? Where do I, all this speculative, this exercise and speculating on the ideas and being more afraid of just taking a step forward, to me becomes part of the ugly side as well. We know that the problems exist. This conference has taught me more about Virginia than I've ever imagined, and I've worked in Virginia. But I think what is important on that journey and that recognition of that is the fact that we know that there are solutions, and we know that oftentimes we have many of the solutions that exist. We just have to take the position, be willing to move towards solutions and not get bogged down in how long it's going to take. And I don't have enough money. My foundation only has these amount of resources, and I need to hire another person. We need to do all those things, true, but we need to do something. We can't just sit on the sidelines and let us be stagnant. We should not be in the same conversation 10 years from now.
I wholeheartedly agree with you. I mean, the sense of urgency to act is now, and the idea that there's not enough resources, not enough time, not enough care, that's all a fallacy, right? Like, in this room alone, we have billions of dollars worth of assets that are sitting here, right? Where are they going, right? So that's the thing that we really have to challenge ourselves on. I want to get to this point around sort of the vague nature of our language sometimes. Philanthropy is known for speaking its own language. We can either be very, very broad and vague when we're describing things, or very, very complex when we're trying to just convey some of the simplest things. Even when we're talking about racial equity, we use phrases like the work or the journey or the challenge that is, right? And so just what does any of that even mean?
Google it. No. there were several years ago. Some of you probably remember there. I'm blanking on the gentleman's name, but there was like this philanthropy bingo contest, right? The idea of identifying where what's the buzzword, and if you sit in a room, you can have this bingo card, and as soon as someone says something like intersectionality or come up with a word, racial justice. I mean, the things that become the flavors du jour for the sector to me become part of. It's typical for a sector, an organization, an institution. They find validity in creating their own language. They find validity in creating their own ways in which to describe the work, because that gives them some sort of an insider's, access. We talk about this over here. I get it for doctors. I get it for lawyers. But for philanthropy, it becomes way too complicated, unnecessarily so. And I think, again, that also does add to this notion of really creating a separate caste in how we define the work. If someone is hungry, they need food. They don't need a report. They don't need, some sort of a structural analysis. The facts are the facts. And so I think we need to get away from being so complicated because the complication leads to inertia. It leads to us not getting to the root cause of where we are, how we got here, and how do we get out of being here.
You're now talking about some tangible things, right? Like, let's remove reporting requirements.
Mm-hmm.
I heard like pins right drop in this room.
Yeah,
You said that.
there's pearls grasp
Right.
and everything, all of that.
What are some other tangible steps that you think, or practical things that we can start to do?
I'm going to shout out Rashawn and shout out the Weisberg Foundation for taking us on a journey a few weeks ago. And who's in here from Richmond? I got to meet some of you, or got to reacquaint with some of you in this journey where we were in community, and we went from literally the origins of Richmond to the promise of Richmond, from Monument Avenue to the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. We saw, and not only saw, but we actually talked to people in community to understand where their opportunities are, to hear personal stories of people that are doing work by day, advancing support for community that are having their own struggles and challenges and biases. Those stories are very real. I mean, we tap any of us, we can talk about what is our pressing challenge today. And your challenge may not be my challenge, but my opportunity comes in understanding what your challenges are. And maybe if I have a solution, perhaps I could be of benefit to you, or know someone that may be of benefit to you. We need to keep doing that. We need to not just hear stories for the sake of stories. Maybe pull out a tissue and say, I'll move. But what do you do after that tissue? What do you do after the tissue dries? How do you really move in such a way that we are not, again, hearing the same story from someone else, because we still haven't resolved the issue, because the issue that we knew to be true. We need to keep pressing towards solutions, using resources that we have to press towards solutions. If we attended a class and got a gold star, it's not just for the sake of getting the gold star. It's for that real movement of what do you do with what you've learned. And so there's countless resources in this room of knowledge. We got my cousin over here, we cousin by last name. But the idea that what was shared with the whole fellows, and there are other fellowship groups and other institutions that are out here. Abafee has a fellowship program. We learn, we bring people into these spaces for them to not just learn to keep doing the same thing, but to learn to do something differently and to be really more committed to this sector, so that the sector, maybe somewhere, some generations from now, may work itself out of business, but there's going to always be challenges in our society. So we need to figure out whatever that societal challenge that you've committed to with your mission statement, do that. And if you can't do it by yourself, find out other people that can do it. Be in collaboration, not only with funders, but as we've learned today, federal agencies, policies that are out here that are undermining everything that you are doing in your foundation. And if you're not addressing those issues of policy, which is another solution or recommendation, then you're not really doing the job. You're not doing the work.
That's a sermon.
Well, pass the plate. Let's get it moving.
So I'm curious. You named that the Weisberg Foundation went to Richmond. I was fortunate enough to come on tour with y'all. Are y'all going anywhere else this year?
Who's from Danville? Oh, okay. I met someone from Danville last night. So.
Who's been to Danville?
Okay.
Not enough of you.
No. Yeah. So that's where we're going in June. Looking forward, I've never been to Danville. Didn't know I wanted to go, but then Rashawn said we need to go, so I'm going. The idea of us exploring places that we've not been, I think, is another part of our own personal journeys, and that could even be in our own communities. There are places. When we had our conference in D.C. a couple weeks ago, we took our attendees to Anacostia. I know because I had a friend that was visiting from another country a few years ago. On the federal government website, as far as travel warnings, they said, "Do not go to this particular neighborhood after dark." Anacostia, just south of the U.S. Capitol, and they said, you don't want to go there after dark. It's a vibrant community. It's a community with beautiful people, with growth and opportunity that's soon to be undermined through gentrification because people find the value in those places. But those are the kinds of things that shy people away from delving and being committed to moving in. Go to places that you don't know. Talk to people that you don't know. Try to get beyond the idea of our own echo chambers in this work. And don't let that deter you from, there are people that I am clear I will not likely ever agree with until they come to my side. But even with that in mind, the idea that there are still ways that we can get to what we want to do in the society and make it better by listening and being more in community when we do it.
Rashawn, can I come to Danville with y'all? An open invitation to learn, to listen, to inspire. It's great. Thank you so much, Edward. I really appreciate this. Let's give a round of applause. So we listened to one brilliant person after another, and now we're going to hear from our third just genius in the room. Please join me in welcoming Amy Owens, the president and CEO of the Community Foundation of Loudoun and Northern, you got to help me out with this word. Yeah, that word. Counties. I didn't want to mess that up and insult anybody not from Virginia. So, who will share with us the ways that the foundation that she is a part of has actually lived into this work of racial equity, and the role that white people play in meaningfully engaging on this journey. So as Amy sprinkles her genius into this conversation, I again invite you to submit your questions using Slido, and we'll get to those at the end of our conversation. All right. So put your hands together for Amy. Good morning.
Good morning.
So I'm curious, Amy. I want to start. How did the Community Foundation find itself on this journey?
Mm-hmm. Well, for me, for my journey, it was by the honor of serving on the board of the Washington Regional Association of Grantmakers, another PSO under Tamara Copeland's leadership, who would be here today if she weren't in Greece. And she is an entrepreneur of a fantastic series called Putting Racism on the Table. And it was a fantastic opportunity for me as an individual raised in a liberal household to begin understanding that as a quiet individual that I was part of the problem and that I needed to start my journey. And so that was where it started personally. And then because I work with the Community Foundation, was able to begin moving that into our work.
What was the lift that was required to get the Community Foundation to make progress?
Well, not a lot, frankly. While at that time, it has since changed, but our board was majority white. There was support for introducing during our annual Philanthropy Summit racial justice and racial equity in that. In fact, Rashawn was part of the panels and programs there. And the acknowledgement from the community was so strong that it was clear we were doing the right thing. We were on a path that people were interested in joining us.
And what came as a result of this internal work and the conversations that were happening and the staff at the board level?
Well, so we began to try and create new opportunities to spread the word. And the big aha for me was Tamara Copeland was retiring. So great opportunity, right? And I wanted to be part of change. And I knew that as a white woman, I was in a place where I could begin talking clearly and with definition about things like not just equity, but white supremacy, and helping individuals understand exactly what that is. But I didn't know how to have that conversation in isolation with myself. And so Tamara and I got together and scripted a 5-hour workshop called the Onion Dialogues. And it basically teaches us how to talk about race, racism, and racial justice. And we hope that that is giving people tools to move forward with respect and empathy and understanding.
You're teeing me up. I have to ask, what is the meaning behind the Onion?
The Onion Dialogues,
Yeah.
well, Tamara named that. I had probably some real dry title that's not even memorable. And we opened the session up with that. Tamara, why did you name it this? And she says, well, onions are, they have layers, and you've got to peel it back. And when you cut it, there's going to be some pain. There may be some weeping. But you start cooking it, and it's flavored. In the night without direct conversation and without direct connection for so long. And while individuals, black and brown individuals in the workshop have also said, thank you. This is validating. This is affirming what has been in denial and not put on the table for 400 years.
I imagine that a series like this elicits a lot of tension and emotion in that space. How do you hold that with participants?
Well, except for a couple of police officers who joined us, everybody has been, we talk a lot about police brutality in the program, but we really try and make it a calling in rather than calling out episode. And if people make some misstep, we will ask them kindly to elaborate more. And can I tell you, Christopher, how that affected me when you made that comment? And part of my role is to, in my view, is to represent the stupid white person. I can't say it any better than that. I mean, I know that place. I've been in that place. And so what I'm trying to do is to create that same space for my white peers and colleagues in the room to say, yeah, we start the system, we start the seminar off with the question, when did you know you had race? And my answer is, well, I grew up in Tuscaloosa, Alabama during the George Wallace days, by the way. I didn't have race. Other people had race. Because if a man walks in the room, it's white man. If a black man walks in the room, then we describe it. And we try and peel that back, the assumptions that we make in society. Those are some of the things we work on.
Thank you. So what are some of the other things that the foundation has done to advance racial equity?
Well, we pinged on ACT of Alexandria, thank you, and pulled in a nonprofit group, wonderful training called Service Never Sleeps. Whitney Parnell was just a force for the good. So we brought in another seminar series. We funded racial equity audits for nonprofits so that they could begin to understand what their marketing looks like, what's their annual report reflecting, who are they recruiting for the board, their hiring practices. We have continued to follow that theme with our annual Philanthropy Summit. We have just released a Black-led nonprofit mini grants program, and during the pandemic, did a minority-led business grants program, which is very unusual for any grant maker to do, but community foundations have a little bit of wiggle room when it comes to grant making. So that was another initiative that we took on.
So that to me is huge, that you're giving money to, one, that you're expressly and explicitly naming that we are prioritizing grant making to Black-led work. And we're giving resources to organizations to better understand where they fall within their own racial equity journey, facilitating audits so that they have a basis to jump from as they are working to operationalize racial equity. I mean, that's huge. You don't see that.
It's so huge because those entrepreneurial nonprofit leaders are serving that audience. And if we don't support their work, we're not going to support that audience. Yeah.
So where do you all go from here?
Well, just staying on the journey ourselves, we have formed our own READY committee, racial equity, accessibility, diversity, and inclusion. And we are reviewing all of our policies. We've reviewed our value statement, made some revisions there. I think another big initiative that we're following is one that CF leads and the Council on Foundations is recommending, which is values-aligned grant making, and working on developing clear policies because, as you know, for community foundations, we're extremely donor-centric. And having been in the field for about 25 years, the philosophy was generally to be agnostic. If the IRS had approved a nonprofit, we would make a grant to that nonprofit. But we all know that there are many, many nonprofits who are moving into that 501c space that are extremist, hate-oriented groups. And so we're trying to develop a policy so that we can say, we want to support you, donor, but this is not a grant that we can make, and here's why. And that's an unusual place for a community foundation to stand, and I can tell you that my board is, well, let's just say the discussions are lively at this point.
It also, to your point, I mean, I work in the LGBTQ grant-making space, and we are seeing a wave of far extremist and very well-resourced opposition to equality. But we're also seeing some organizations that are not saying it too loudly, but the way that they make determinations on who they're serving and who they're not serving is very clear. And we only find that out if we ask the right kinds of questions. So what I'm hearing you say is that it's not just trying to build up a base of folks who are able to address these issues outright, but it's also expressly saying, we're going to start to prompt the folks that we have been giving to for a long time. And we're going to start to question, dig a little deeper and understand, are they really living up to the values that we are wanting to hold, the values that we're espousing, and making sure that when they're talking about including the community, they mean that in the fullest sense of the word.
Yes, absolutely. And I can't wait to get on the road because obviously the resources there will help spin that up in really positive ways. I'm really looking forward to it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for this evening. I really appreciate it. Let's
Thank
give
you,
Amy a round of
Christopher.
applause. So I want you all to join me in welcoming back Kendra Jones, Edward Jones, Amy Owens, and Stephanie Glenn so that we can take a deeper dive into the topic of racial equity and philanthropy and explore where we as individuals and as a sector, broadly all of us in this room, go from here. So please put your hands together for everybody one more time. Thank you.
Did anybody's slide go?
Yeah, we got several questions. Please feel free to continue to submit these questions. I have some preset things, but definitely going to dive into your questions in a bit. So I wanna start us off. One, I've had the pleasure of learning about Virginia. I'm not from Virginia, but I am a student of the South, and I've had the pleasure of learning about the past and present of Virginia from my incredible colleagues here, as well as some inspired leaders who are working to drive justice and liberation from the State House to the streets. And I'm left wondering, where do we as a philanthropic community need to be in order to make Virginia not just a place for lovers, but a place, I was hoping to get some more laughs. But a place for dreamers and doers and change makers. So, what do you all think about what we need to be doing collectively?
So I would like to start with maybe two recommendations. The first is to think outside of the box as far as how you address the issues that your foundations are working on. There are so many different tools in our toolkits. One that I was really proud to be a part of and lead the efforts around was using art as a mechanism to tell the stories, accurate narratives of the communities being served by our partners. It allowed them to elevate their voice, name solutions to the problems that they face, because we know that, we'll hire consultants to do a white paper. We'll assess the communities. We'll work with our partners. But it's rare that we really engage the community members themselves. And it's imperative that we do so, because lived experience is a model that we need to uplift and value. Another thing that I would suggest is, don't be afraid to support policy and advocacy work. There's a way to do so as foundations. And I think that was one of the sessions here. So that's one of the mechanisms that we're using at Richmond Memorial Health Foundation, supporting our partners in their policy and advocacy areas in order to see the changes, to move the levers, and to make that systemic level change that we want to see in the community. So those two recommendations are surefire ways that we can hear from community members themselves and change the systems that created the disparities, the inequities that we see in the communities we serve.
Kendra, you shared this point. You shared this point around valuing lived experience and leaning into community. We got a question from the audience that asks that we rely so heavily on our grantees to be the representatives of the communities that they're serving. How do we, as philanthropic agents, actually embed ourselves into community so that we are listening directly from folks who are in the neighborhoods that we are reaching with our dollars?
All right, so I have two more recommendations. So one of the ways that you can do so is the way that you're in relationship with your partners, right? So right now, my colleagues and I have the extreme pleasure of working with the phenomenal Gladys Washington that was with Babcock Foundation. And she's giving us so many gems and jewels on how to be in relationship. And part of being in relationship with our partners goes beyond that financial support. It goes into going to them and meeting with them after hours sometimes, so not between 8 to 5, not between 9 to 5, but showing up at the meetings that they have around 6, showing up to their events, having more than the interim conversations and the final report conversations with them, removing burdens on the way that they are able to report back to us. That's something that I love that came about as a result of the pandemic with our foundations. So before, our grantees were writing these interim reports and these final reports that, I'm not even really sure that everyone in our foundations were reading. The program officer assigned to that grantee would do like a closing report on that. and I know it was approved by the CEO, but how are we sharing that learning with others in our foundations and with our philanthropic partners in the greater community? And so now what we're doing in a way to be in relationship different is we're having conversations. We remove the reporting requirements from them. We remove that burden. We put the burden. You start to establish a rapport and build trust with these partners. They see you as a resource. You see them as a resource. So it's been really incredible. And I do believe that this is a technique, a mechanism that we're going to continue with moving forward. And then the second one just left my mind. Oh gosh. But yeah, so being in relationship differently. Oh, thank you, thank you.
I think,
Yeah.
we had a discussion yesterday around asset building and talking about assets versus deficits. I think one of the things, I think there's some tangible things that Kendra talked about, but I think we have an opportunity within philanthropy to change the narrative of how we talk about people of the community. We might say we want to fund philanthropy is used to funding literacy programs. We have to teach community about financial literacy. And I think we need to shift the thought process to that's people focused. That's uh, issue focused. I think we need to do it people focused, and go deeper to why we even need financial literacy programs in the first place. How can we transform the legacy of giving, right? We want to reverence the decades of philanthropic giving, right? As I mentioned kind of earlier in my comments, reverence that. We still need to continue to do that gap building, but how can we talk with our donors, talk with our partners, and change our language to it's not their deficit, but if we focus on the policy, the practices, the thought processes around how we got there, I really believe that that could be the shift that philanthropy needs to do. So, we always think about DEI. I think you mentioned all these language, the journey, DEI, diversity, equity and inclusion. But I'm like, if you strip all of that, everyone in this room are human. We all have red blood. We all have white bones. And so we start to kind of approach the work like that. Now we are infusing, there's black led, there's native led, there's immigrant led, there's LGBTQ, there's all these spectrums, there's white women, black women within the conversation. But if we start to shift from they to us, include us in the conversation, that I believe that can kind of bring down the barriers that philanthropy is up against right now.
I'm glad you brought up that point around the financial literacy piece, because when I heard that this morning, and I appreciate those conversations, but it's this idea of what are they doing wrong? How do they not know this? But I find it interesting that folks aren't talking about the financial mismanagement of the wealthy, or talking about the issues of loopholes that are created that give people better advantage.
That's to go deeper. Thank you. That's to go deeper.
That's the part that gets me. So, just a thought. But in the spirit of that too, and I appreciate how this shows up. You mentioned the idea of Virginia's for lovers, but Virginia is also the home of the Lovings. So there's a history that sits here that I'm learning from the Virginians and from folks along this journey that has generation after generation after this 500 plus years of elements that have shown up in in this state, one of 50 in the territories that make up the United States. And why that's important is because I'm also troubled by what we are seeing as a nation and how certain spaces in our country, certain states in our country become the testing grounds for undermining the things that we say we are together to address, and to see that there could be legislation that would criminalize teachers for teaching the truth.
The truth.
And if it works in one community, someone else is going to try it somewhere else until it's beaten back. The idea that there were young people that took it upon themselves to turn something that was meant for bad into good by using the hotline and then dialing and using and making determined decisions around their community that they wanted to see. That idea of getting community engagement from the mouths of our young people, our future. That's the other part of engagement. And I think it becomes critically important for us to not shy away from the history, but not to repeat it too. And I think that's the other part that philanthropy plays a significant role in. All of us, those that live in Virginia, wherever you live, I live in DC, I'm one person, I have a right to vote. So right now, as of today, I have a right to vote, right? But those things that are showing up for us that whether my organization or me as an individual value are being challenged, I have a responsibility. As philanthropy has a responsibility to serve the public. The public good is they're your clients, they are your customers. And so if we're failing our customers, what business wants to do that? You're failing. And government is also, we are the employers of our government. We have jobs to do in these spaces. We have to understand what those jobs are and not be afraid to do our jobs.
I also want to take a point of privilege as the moderator and say to the previous question around how we as a sector really show up in community is also hire us, right? Like I am a person who came from movement work, and just 2 years ago, still in movement work, still a rabble rouser, still almost getting arrested for protesting constantly, and we're in a space here with you all, talking about how to move money to people who have been systemically disenfranchised by this nation and continue to face injustice. So it's going to meetings, listening to folks in community, and hiring those folks to make the decisions, whether you are participatory or a more traditional approach to your grant making. We got another question, which I think is in line with what you were just describing, Edward. This Virginia has declared racism a public health crisis. Yet we are balancing a charge to criminalize the education of racism. So where do we go from here in that front, right? Like it seems like we have competing agendas.
Yeah, we do. People have to ask themselves, is that acceptable? I mean, at the end of the day, it's a personal question that requires a very personal action and decision. Even if it's acceptable, then you're silent. If it's unacceptable, then you're gonna say something. You're gonna make some decisions. You're gonna invest differently. You're going to vote differently. You're going to talk to people differently. I was appreciating, Amy, as you talked about the learning that's happening in Fauquier County and Loudoun counties, and how this onion is being peeled back, and this idea of how folks are learning their roles in this journey, and making a decision on what role you're going to take becomes a really critical part of that. And so this idea that that racism is a public health crisis, the idea that the notion of PTSDs and the idea of trauma that has been historic in most of the communities that we talk about have been marginalized and underserved is now just becoming something understood generation after generation, where we can be outraged by the stories that we see and rightfully outraged by what we see in Ukraine, but not care about down the road from us, and not make intentional decisions around addressing those issues that we even have more proximate to change. That becomes a problem, because again, we're looking over the problem to try to find some other way, find some other way to address the issue without even thinking about how we need to bless each other, how we need to bless the people in our communities that we can see and that we can touch if we make a decision to do so.
Yeah, and I'm completely disturbed by this challenge. I think this is why this work is so hard. It's emotional. especially for, I think, I'm not even, it's emotional for all who are invested in it. I'll say that. You know, talking about, you know, it's a public health crisis. And I tell this story, people that have heard me speak before. I was at Abafee. I was 42 years old, just about 3 years ago, and heard for the first time in my adult life that I was not a slave. And I was confused. Like, what do you mean? That's what the book said. We've been learning about slavery since my elementary school was Christopher Columbus, and we would reenact. It was a thing. In that moment, what was said was we were enslaved people. We were kings, queens, fathers, mothers, sisters, brothers, entrepreneurs. We were neighbors. We were countrymen of our countryside, and we were stolen. We were stolen and forced into enslaved labor. So it disturbs me that my son, who's 5, again, school, not the responsibility of the school, right, to do these things, but it disturbs me that when we know better, you have to do better. You have to shift, and that they are trying to block my son from knowing that he didn't come from slaves. He came from a people who are resilient, and the fact that
that into a nonprofit.
So this theme has come up a bit in the conversation. This notion of neutrality and also maybe apprehension from white folks when engaging in the conversation of racial equity and then engaging in the actual practice to change the system that they operate in. So I'm wondering how do we unpack that, and then how do we offer guidance for folks who are curious and want to jump into this?
I gotta go. Because I'm laughing because Courtney and I just had this conversation over breakfast or right after breakfast, and because it's in the statement of Virginia Funders Network, right? Y'all did read that sheet? They paid money to get that out there, right? And what my comment was, Courtney, it was a great discussion. This notion of neutrality is one that we should all probe. We talk about being nonpartisan, right? That's what everyone has to say. We learned in that advocacy session yesterday that you can advocate for stuff, you can lobby for stuff. So get rid of that thought. But this idea of being neutral, and I'll say from when I was when I was at the council for 12 years, the council Council Foundation was accused of either being too far left or too far right, depending upon who you talk to. And when you're in organizations that are member organizations, you will your members will tell you that all day long. You tick somebody off, or you made somebody very happy, all day long. So I don't know, where is Katie in here? Because hey, Katie, we're alums of that council school, right? And so I'm just letting you know that you're gonna tick some people off, and you probably already have by even having this conference, and that's okay. But the idea of being neutral does not mean that you are without voice. There was a politician that once said, "You don't have permanent friends or permanent enemies; you have permanent interests." If your interests are true, then make them your interests. And if they tick off somebody, I don't know why. If you tick off somebody, then maybe they don't need to be on your side anyway. They're not on your side. If you're true to your mission, then you are not being neutral. Your mission is not a neutral thing. Who you work with to get to your mission may vary. You may find places you agree with, but the idea of neutrality is it's a slippery slope if you're being neutral to the point of being ineffective and inactive and actually without any voice at all, because all voices matter, and the loudest ones are the ones that are getting all the attention. We have so many people that are doing all the great work that is happening in Virginia that most people don't know about. What they know about are the things that are getting the headlines. And those things are not things that are aligned with many of your beliefs. So think about what you want to do with that voice as a Virginia funder.
Philanthropy is stronger when we are united together. Funny enough, that also happens to be the theme of the conference. Stronger together. So with that in mind, Amy, you gave us a great solution. Let's create a fund. What other things should we as a network be working to address?
I have to read this. I'm sure there'll be much more actionable items, but this is, oh goodness, I just lost it. Here, let me find it.
I like the way Stephanie started off today talking about the big I and the little I. Intentionality, being intentional around coming together, working on issues, putting your money where your mouth is in order to have a greater impact on the things that we want to see changed, causing good trouble like Christopher is doing on a regular basis, and working collaboratively. I think since over the last few years, definitely during the pandemic, we saw philanthropy come together and collaborate in ways that I had never seen before. Let's not go back to the old ways.
That's right.
Let's continue along that collaborative path. Yeah. So let's put our money together. Lots of us are funding the same organizations. Some of us are funding programmatic work. A lot of us are funding the same programmatic work and having them report on different outcomes to us. So what would it look like if, and so my colleagues and my colleagues know that I'm a big advocate, and I know this is out of left field, for the no application. I'm a big advocate for conversations, but I was convinced that we have to have applications. I understand that, but
It's a journey. It's a journey.
It's a journey, right? It's a journey, and so one day, right? One day maybe. But what would it look like if we had a universal application here, right? Where we remove burden from grantees of having to fill out so many different applications. If, certain issue areas, we got together and we pooled our money together to work on that. I'd like to highlight and emphasize that this month right here is Mental Health Awareness Month. And we know from the pandemic that this is an urgent crisis going on in our nation, around the world, really. And so those that are working on mental health issues, are you talking to each other? Just like in the Equity Roadmap Toolkit that I share, how are you sharing your learning? How are you sharing your journey so that others can come along and join and make a greater impact so that we can actually move the needle? So, yeah.
And I would add, yeah, that's great. I would say an action item is to lead from your seat. If you, Kenisha's my colleague and the foundation, and we really just started this journey, my new role. We talking about diversity and engagement, and I just employed everyone.